All right, well, hello everyone. So we're going to begin the process of looking at our immune system, right? So we're going to kind of cover the immune system in a couple of different ways, right? So hopefully you've already viewed the lymphatic system lecture, right? So that's the lymphatic system. It's related to our immune system in certain ways. It's also related to our cardiovascular system, as we discussed. Um, so be sure you've viewed that lecture series first. And now we're going to look at our immune system, right? So our immune system is, and you're familiar with the immune system at least to some degree, right? Involving various types of cells that are going to combat some type of, foreign pathogen, foreign organism that enters our body, right? So whether that's a bacteria, a virus, parasite, whatever it happens to be, our immune system will combat and attack against that pathogen, right? Now, one thing that is different about the immune system compared to many other, bodily systems that we've discussed in the past and we'll talk about in the future, is the fact that the immune system really doesn't have structures like our other systems, right? So think of your skeletal system and your muscular system and nervous system and endocrine and cardiovascular and renal and respiratory and digestive, right? All of those have actual structures somewhere, right? They have the heart and the kidneys and the liver and the brain and bones and muscles and so on. Our immune system, it's mostly cells, right? So it's going to be different in that sense, right? Now, we're going to talk about two different types of immunity or immune system. This first part that we're going to focus on, we're going to cover some basics, and then we're going to talk about our innate immune system, and then in kind of our major part two, we'll talk about something called the adaptive immune system, right? And I'll differentiate those as we go through, right? So when talking about the immune system, just in general, right? Consider various types of pathogens, right? We are not going to go into much detail at all regarding the various types of pathogens and how they differ in terms of structure and how they exert their effect, right? But be familiar with some of them, and many of them you're familiar with, right? So bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoans, multicellular parasites, right? And so you're familiar with many of these, right? And at different times, right? So at the time of this recording, right, the COVID-19 pandemic is largely behind us, right? But that was an issue of a virus, right? Also, at the time of this recording, in Texas is the measles outbreak, right? So that's a virus, and in that case, it's a very preventable spread, right? This is a very preventable disease, measles. In fact, in the early 2000s, measles was considered eradicated from the United States. No detectable transmission for 12 months, and now it's back, largely due to poor vaccine rates among certain communities. So we'll talk about these, and again, we'll get into more detail when we get to the adaptive immune system. We'll talk about specifically how certain cells combat, attacks against these various types of pathogens, right? Also, in general, we'll talk about different types of cells, right? So we'll do leukocytes. So leukocytes are just our different types of white blood cells, right? So we have our granulocytes and our agranulocytes. Recall the granulocytes end in "phil", so these are our basophils, our neutrophil, and our eosinophil. And then our agranulocytes are our monocytes and our lymphocytes, right? So for our innate immune system that we'll kind of get into here in just a little while, we're going to talk about neutrophils and eosinophils and monocytes and basophils, things like that. When we get to our adaptive immune system, also called our acquired immune system or our specific immune system, we will focus primarily on our lymphocytes, right? So our T cells and our B cells, right? So just recall that whenever we get to that here in just a little bit, right? You've also got various structures that are really part of the lymphatic system, but again, remember the lymphatic system has a close relationship with the immune system. So these are our different lymphoid structures, right? So remember we talked about primary lymphoid structures. This is where our immune cells are formed and where they mature. And then our second ones are essentially where the cells go to ultimately become activated, right? And so our primary ones are things like red bone marrow and our thymus. And then our secondary are going to be all those others, right? So lymph nodes, spleen, tonsils, nodules, the MALT, the mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue, right? And this is where our cells are going to go and ultimately become activated, right? Now, some cells, mostly different types of macrophages, are kind of permanently stored and housed in a particular organ, right? And these are sometimes called resident macrophages, right? Meaning they're a macrophage that is specific to that given organ, right? So in the lungs, they're called alveolar macrophages. In the brain, you have cells called microglial cells. In skin, you have ones called dendritic cells. In the liver, you have ones called Kupffer cells, right? And these are dedicated macrophages that live in that particular organ, right? So they're residents of that organ, right? We've also got different barriers, right, that serve as part of our immune system that we'll get to later, right? So epithelial layers of our skin house dendritic cells. We have other types of connective tissue that house mast cells that are going to release various types of chemicals that we'll talk about here in just a little bit, right? So you can see some of these different locations where we would expect to find various types of cells. So again, T cells, B cells, macrophages, dendritic cells, specific lungs like the alveolar macrophages, dendritic cells in the skin, and then mast cells and various types of connective tissue and possibly the muscle as well, right? Now, another thing we'll discuss kind of throughout both this section, so kind of the innate immune system and our adaptive immune system, are chemicals called cytokines, right? So cytokines are essentially cellular chemicals that are going to regulate the immune system activity in some way, shape, or form, right? And largely they're going to be involved in signaling other types of cells, maybe to become activated, controlling the development of other immune system cells, initiating inflammatory responses, destroying cells, things like that, right? And so we'll talk about different types called interferons, and we'll talk about various ones when we get to our adaptive or our acquired immune system. But essentially know that the way in which immune system cells communicate with each other to signal and to initiate immune responses, the way they do that is through cytokines, right? It's through different types of cytokines, right? So, as we mentioned, we're going to have two different types of immunity, right? This is the innate and the adaptive, right? That's what I'll refer to them as, the innate and the adaptive immune system, right? So these vary in different ways, and you can see these ways, different ways listed here on the screen. The main things I want you to consider are the specificity of the division of the immune system, meaning the cells that are involved, are they specific to a particular pathogen, or are they more general, right? So that's what I mean by specificity. So one is going to be more specific, one is going to be non-specific. The other thing is whether or not you have to kind of develop it, right? So in other words, do you have to be exposed to the pathogen in order for this division to take effect, or do you just naturally have it as a part of you, right? So this is kind of our division that we're going to look at, right? So again, innate and adaptive, right? So you can see they're going to vary based on several different things. What we're going to do with this first part is look at the innate immune system, right? So if something is innate, what does that mean, right? What does the word innate mean, right? So innate means that you have it with you, you have it as a part of you at birth. You don't have to do anything to develop it, right? You have it. You don't have to be exposed to a pathogen. You just have it, right? So these are going to be various types of barriers, and these are going to be other types of non-specific cellular responses. So meaning cells that respond to pathogens, but the cells don't care what type of pathogen it is. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. Our adaptive, that we'll do kind of in our next major lecture series, we'll do part 2, adaptive immunity. It's going to be specific. This is also called acquired. And so the acquired in this case tells you that you have to be exposed to a particular pathogen in order for these cells to initiate their response. And in particular, we'll talk about T cells and B cells, right? They also vary in terms of how long it takes for them to take effect and some of the specific chemicals, but those are some of the main things. So do you have it at birth? Do you have to acquire it, hence the acquired immune system? What are the various cell types, and so on, right? So again, we're going to start with our innate immune system first, right? So characteristics of our innate immune system, again, you have it at birth. It prevents oftentimes the entry of pathogens. And so these are going to be our various barriers that we're going to talk about, right? So you've got your first line, your second line. So if you've had lectures before on the skin, which you likely have, the integumentary system, your skin is sometimes referred to as your first line innate immune system, right? So meaning although it's part of the integumentary system, right, it's our largest organ of our body, the skin is, it's also very important to our immune system, right? So this is why if you have a severe burn, right, if you have a big open wound in the skin, right, what are you at an increased risk for? You're at an increased risk for infection, right? Because now you've opened up a potential, portal of entry into the body for various types of pathogens, right? So you've got your barriers; those are first line, and then you've got second line, which are going to be cells and their various chemicals, cytokines, and other processes, right? So if you think of our various barriers, right, we've got the skin, right? That's kind of the most obvious barrier. You also have mucous membranes, right? These are going to line our body openings, right? So think any tube inside the body that is open to the external environment, right? So think inside of the mouth, esophagus, stomach and intestines, respiratory tract, right? Urogenital tract, right? All of these are lined with a mucous membrane, right? So again, if you run your tongue along the inside of your mouth, right, on the inside of your cheek, your tongue is touching the mucous membrane lining your oral cavity, right? So you have various substances that are associated with these mucous membranes, and I'll focus on one here, something called your mucociliary escalator, right? So your mucociliary escalator, if you break this word apart, mucus, ciliary means cilia, and then escalator, right? So we primarily consider this in the context of the respiratory system, okay? So you have cilia lining your respiratory tract. You breathe in, right? You inhale things. You inhale dust and pathogens and dirt and all types of other grime and junk, right? And that gets trapped in the mucus. And then your cilia will kind of beat and propel and move all of that junk upwards out of the respiratory tract into your pharynx. And then you can either swallow it or you can spit it out, right? But this mucociliary escalator is helping to move things up out of the respiratory tract so you can then get rid of it, right? So again, think immune system, right? You've also got your your commensal microflora. So this is essentially your normal bacteria, right? So normal bacteria that you have as a part of your body that is helpful, it is necessary, it is useful for keeping yourself healthy, right? So in this case, the bacteria are non-pathogenic, meaning they're not harmful, right? You need them, you want them in there, right? One thing that they do, they perform various types of functions. So they make certain types of vitamins and they may help with some digestion. But importantly, they help keep pathogenic bacteria in check, right? So meaning that by having these normal, healthy microorganisms in the body and the gut, they're helping to prevent the growth and development of potentially harmful or potentially pathogenic bacteria and other types of microorganisms, right? And so this is something that you can think of in the context of, antibiotics, right? If you wipe out all of your normal healthy gut bacteria with kind of broad spectrum antibiotics, now you've opened up the possibility for potentially harmful bacteria to now take root because the normal non-pathogenic bacteria are no longer there, right? And so they can now come in and potentially take over and grow and cause an infection, okay? So let's stop there with this first part, and then we'll pick up in our next part and we'll begin talking about still innate, but we'll talk about the second line, so not barriers, but we'll talk about certain types of cellular processes that are involved in keeping us healthy.